Hey, Cypher here. This is a weird one, but it comes by way of a Patreon request. I'm not going to be doing those anymore because they're adding way too much research for me. Especially this one, I ended up reading a ton of books. So maybe someday I'll do like a history of piracy or something like that because I ended up doing a lot of reading. The 1951 movie Anne of the Indies, at first blush, seems to be related to Anne Bonny, a rather famous pirate. But ultimately it is not. It's just a fictitious pirate romp, but at least I can go a little deeper into Bonny's story. During major European wars, countries gave permission to their merchant captains for privateering. Basically, they were allowed to plunder enemy vessels so long as they had a letter of marque. These letters of marque basically legalized piracy, at least against enemy countries. Privateers made a bunch of money during these wars, and as you might guess, they didn't want to stop when peace came. That is precisely what happened after the Treaty of Utrecht. The War of Spanish Succession was a boon to privateers, who could take all the Spanish gold that was under a French flag. So many of these privateers kept going once they knew that a letter of marque was invalid. The 17 teens and 20s was a golden age for piracy. Benjamin Hornigold even pretended he was still a privateer by continuing to only ransack French and Spanish ships, despite his crew's growing desire to go after British merchandise. Privateers were not pirates, but without a valid letter of marque, they technically were. Piracy was punishable by death, which is the fate most pirates met in the early 18th century. Hornigold was simply trying to avoid the noose. He ended up helping establish a hideout for pirates at Nassau on New Providence Island, where many of these pirates flocked. It was a realm of promiscuity and craven madness. Rum, prostitutes, and fighting were facets of this lawless Caribbean outpost. They had a code for dividing power and spoils, even contracts to bind a crew to this code.
Have you the stomach to join us? It's not too great a step from privateersman to honest buccaneer. Have him sign the articles. I'll make share for all future purchases.
But they didn't mean they lived particularly well. Many saw piracy as a better alternative to regular sailing under the horrific discipline of merchantmen in the Navy. But pirates led nasty, brutish, and often very short careers. With so much wealth fueled by wanton piracy, of course it'd be crazy. This is where Anne Bonny first made her way into the pirate world. We don't know anything about her prior to 1720 besides that she was in New Providence, which might indicate she was one of many prostitutes. Either way, the island would not last as a pirate haven. King George I issued a royal pardon for anyone willing to give up the life of piracy, sending Woodes Rogers to clean up the Caribbean. He arrived in Nassau in 1718. Most surrendered and accepted the pardon, though some like Charles Vane would return to piracy shortly thereafter. He was found out and used a recently captured French vessel as a fireship to brush aside Rogers's fleet and escape Nassau, which was no longer a pirate haven. Vane was vicious even by notably ruthless pirate standards. We are talking about hardened criminals after all. Vane's crew deposed him, making Jack Rackham the new captain. They returned to Nassau to seek a pardon from Rogers, blaming Vane for their slip into piracy. That didn't last long and they went right back to raiding again on a small sloop. This time, 2 women were aboard and joined in. They were Mary Read and Anne Bonny. If they had been prostitutes beforehand, Rogers's crackdown on the oldest profession probably drove them onto the soon-to-be pirate vessel, and thereby joining the crew. On one such raid, Bonny threatened to kill a woman, but appears to have never actually engaged in violence. Both Read and Bonny wore women's clothes normally, but switched to typical sailor's garb during raids. They were only pirating for 2 months before being captured without a serious fight in 1720, then taken to Jamaica for trial. Britain executed nearly all the pirates and gibbeted their corpses to warn others against piracy. Both Read and Bonny escaped execution by showing they were pregnant. Read died in prison, possibly during childbirth, whereas Bonny left the record. Though Tyler Rodriguez, the one who sponsored this episode, has uncovered some new evidence that she hopes to publish soon. Most of the pirates of the so-called Golden Age would meet such an end. The British Empire managed to squash them throughout the 1720s, executing hundreds to prove the crime doesn't pay. Piracy would actually continue in small pockets of the Caribbean for a century, at least until the United States wiped it out through the Navy's 1817-25 West Indies crackdown. Pirates during the 17 teens and 20s are all kinds of romanticized. From video games all the way back to fictional literature at the time, people like to pour their personal ideals into the empty void of sea thieves. There just isn't that much information on them, which means myth will inevitably fill the holes in our knowledge. And this started with Anne Bonny only 4 years after her capture, with the General History of Pirates. Even the pseudonym of this unknown author clearly indicates it is fantastical, being derived from the name of a popular playwright who wrote The Successful Pirate, which heavily romanticized another pirate a decade prior. And oh boy, did this unknown Captain Johnson fabricate Bonny's story. It was clearly meant to sell books, rather than an honest investigation into these various criminals. But he also gets a surprising amount of things correct about verifiable events, so this is a very competent work of historical fiction, especially for 1724. Unfortunately, the general history is often the sole source for descriptive information about Golden Era pirates. Even the term Pirate Golden Age is a 19th century invention. Just like any periodization, it can be quite misleading. Worse still is the idea that it is something praiseworthy, something which general history dabbles in pretty heavily. And since it has this weird legacy, you'll find prominent historians quoting this work of fiction like it is definitive. Marcus Rediker, in particular, loves to portray pirates as social bandits, fighting against capital, like they're Robin Hood types. This goes completely against the reality portrayed by primary sources, including many pirates' own testimony. Heck, I saw a historian claiming Anne Bonny was a secret lesbian, because Johnson made up some lurid tale about her accidentally falling in love with Mary Read when she was cross-dressing. Problem there is that testimony from their trial reveals that they both wore feminine attire most of the time. So that breaks Johnson's entire story and renders that historian's assertions quite absurd. That's just the realm that you've got to deal with when researching criminals in the 18th century. For Anne Bonny herself, we've got just a few primary sources on her, most of which were newspaper snippets, and only 2 substantive ones: a proclamation and a trial kinda transcript. That's it. People sometimes take the word of a 1964 novel claiming to have found a trove of new sources, but it doesn't have a single citation or even a passing reference to any specifics, nor does it give those supposed sources to anyone else. That's the realm we're dealing with here, where historians regularly reference unverified fiction as though it is fact. Everything else is muddled by Johnson's falsehoods. From 1724 to present, you can find all kinds of descriptions of pirates that are just complete fantasy. These people were barely surviving by robbing mostly fishermen and small merchant ships. They preyed upon lesser armed vessels and used fear of torture to make sure people yielded to their black flags. They were no different from Somali pirates today, yet we don't romanticize them.
All right, men, remember, do not hit the white ones!
Me and my crew are gonna go on pirating forever!
Claire?
Think about how silly our depictions are. Like the whole pirate talk gimmick, "Arr, I'm a pirate, arr," comes from an actor in a 1950 adaptation of Treasure Island using a harsh version of the accent from his hometown in southwest England.
Long John Silver, portrayed by that world-famous star, Robert Newton.
And I say there'll be no killing till I gives the word. Shipmates.
These people were not swashbuckling heroes gallivanting about the 7 seas. They were hardened criminals motivated purely by greed.
I'm not just gonna make you rich. I'm not just gonna make you strong. I'm gonna make you the princess of the new world!
There is good work being done to find more sources and dispel the myths, such as what Tyler dug up. She'd found a possible grave record for Anne Bonny from 1733. Seriously. Just that little burial entry could upturn everything we know about this woman. When that gets published, I'll link it in the description. But the fact is, the mythology surrounding pirates has more of a history to it than the actual pirates. That could make for a fun episode in the future. I certainly read enough for it. But with all of this mythology, can we expect anything out of this movie besides a silly and nonsensical adventure? Well, no. There really isn't much to go off of here. The movie itself isn't really about Anne Bonny, though it derives its name from a 1947 article on her. They were just using her name to get people into the theater while the swashbuckler genre was moribund. In this, she has no resemblance to her namesake. She's the captain of a pirate vessel, which is maybe a reference to Grace O'Malley, who was a Northern Irish noblewoman who pirated vessels coming across her shore 150 years prior to 1720. That's also probably where people got the idea of Anne Bonny being some Irish redhead, despite her name clearly indicating she was likely nothing of the sort. That's probably why they changed her name in this, so she's called Anne Providence.
Taken up the Carolinas by Captain Providence.
I am Captain Providence.
Merely named after the island from whence she came.
I was called Anne Providence because I was born on New Providence Isle.
During the 17 teens and 20s, there were no recorded female pirate captains, and that would definitely have been reported. The story also has her being tutored by Edward Teach, who's also known as Blackbeard.
Seems Blackbeard taught you everything. How long have you known him?
Since I was still unable to wipe my own nose, he was father, mother, schoolmaster to us.
Who is yet another one of these ridiculously romanticized characters of that time. Of course, the actual Anne Bonny had no known contact with Blackbeard, but do you honestly expect anything out of that? This is silly fiction. So what does this movie get correct then? Well, there's a lot of cool sailing stuff. Obviously, these ships are way too big, but I kinda love that they worked in a bunch of actual tar jargon.
Only 3 knots with this wind. Loaded with barnacles.
2 loaded if we should meet a man of war.
Best careener and scraper before she drags like a scow. Back the main yard, bosun. Stand by to lower the boat.
Hi, Captain.
A quarter less 5 and Sandy.
Hold it to windward, close as you can. Hands to the braces! Brace up sharp! All in your sheets!
What are you doing, Mr. Dougal?
I mean to keep the weather of him, Captain. Close haul, the Sheba Queen can outsail you.
Let her pay off. Run to leeward.
But that'll bring us under his guns.
So it might be worth checking out just for this stuff. They also nail pretty well the general attitude of pirate captains. They were famously cruel, and we see that in the protagonist.
I bear many scars from the English.
God save the king.
By the veins of your nose, you have drunk your king often in wine. Now drink him in salt water.
Come on, get him!
She even becomes somewhat of a villain right before the finale.
Then shoot us now. Let us die clean.
And spoil your honeymoon? Oh, no. I want you to enjoy it. To see your love scald and bloat in the sun. Her tongue turn black and shriveled. Her eyes change. Till the only light in them is the light of madness. Till she cuts her wrists on these shells to drink her own blood.
So yeah, pretty cool stuff there. There is one scene that did not age well, though.
I take the stand myself to make you a rare offer. You all know me, Captain Providence of the Sheba Queen. I cheat no man and deal only in the finest of merchandise. Here is one fit for the noblest among you. A woman of breeding and temper, spirited like the fine mares of Araby.
Yeah, that's the protagonist trying to sell a white lady to an Arab slave market. While the Ottoman Empire certainly engaged in such a trade, this would have been beyond unlikely, and really plays that whole damsel in distress to 11. They're trying to make the Arabs seem dirty for possible miscegenation. Yeah, as in race mixing. They're trying to make race mixing look bad. That's inaccurate and quite racist. The movie is from 1951 after all. more than a decade before the end of anti-miscegenation laws in the US. But if you can get past that one racist scene, you'll find a charming and silly adventure so typical of the swashbuckling genre. There's nothing really there about Anne Bonny, but it's quite clear that that's not the case. This is what filmmakers should do if they want to fictionalize a story, by completely differentiating themselves from the supposed inspiration. Plus there were some fun battle scenes which the genre was pretty good at delivering. So all in all, it's a fun movie. Well, it's a cat break because this one is attacking my feet. Growing desire. King! God damn it!